Hi, St. Paul Elementary School. It's your old buddy, Mr. Underwood, back for episode 2. Today is April the 7th, and we're going to go over the special things about today. I know, I usually do that on Mondays, but why not do it every day? So apparently today, it is Public Television Day. When I was a kid, public television was really, really important to me. That's the channel that Sesame Street came on and Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood came on. Those were the things that we watched when we were out of school and sick. You couldn't watch anything else. All you could do was watch public television because you were sick and you had to watch something educational. Plus, the only other things on TV were soap operas and news. Nobody wants to watch that when they're sick at home. But public television isn't really a big part of everybody's lives like it used to be. But it had its origins a long time ago when I was a little boy. And that's where Sesame Street and shows like that started at. So it's good to be appreciative of where things came from. It's also World Health Day. Not a bad thing to talk about with things going on in the world. And it's also Metric System Day. What's the metric system? Well, you older guys know what the metric system is because you've already had some teacher somewhere that has already taught you about the metric system. They've told you, they said, listen, you got to learn the metric system. And you're like, why do I have to learn this? We use the imperial system in the United States. And your teacher was like, yes, we use feet and we use inches and we use yards and we use miles. But the rest of the world uses a different system. They use centimeters. They use meters. They use kilometers. They measure in liters. They do things a little differently. So, what's the big deal? Well, it's not really that big of a deal, except we do business with other countries in the world. So if I'm making a product in the United States and I'm using feet and inches to make my product, and I want to sell that product to a country in Africa or Europe where they use the metric system, then we've got to do a lot of math because we have to be able to convert from my inches and feet to their centimeters and meters. Now, I'm going to tell you a little secret if you don't already know this. The imperial system that we use actually came from Europe. We brought it with us when we came to the New World. We brought the imperial system with us. We thought the rest of the world is using this, so we're going to use it too. But guess what they did in Europe? Actually, they did it in France. They decided the imperial system is way too hard. Is this a foot? Is this a foot? Whose foot is this? Does it stink? Oh wait, that's a shoe. Anyway, they couldn't agree to what size a foot was. Whose foot were they using as a guide? So they scrapped it and got rid of it. And what they did in about 1670 in France was they developed and standardized a system called the metric system. Guess what it's based on? Not the size of someone's shoe. It's actually based on decimals. Decimals can have exact measurements. We can go from 0.1 to 1 to 10 to 100 to 1,000. Do you see how easy those numbers are? Those numbers are very, very, very easy. So the metric system is really based on ones and zeros. Ones, tens, hundreds, thousands. Now, what's the imperial system based on? Well, I don't know. This is about an inch. What's that based on? All I know is that from about my knuckle to the end of my thumb is an inch. That's how I estimate inches. How do I estimate centimeters? Well, I don't really have to estimate centimeters, but it's about my pinky nail. A pinky nail is about a centimeter. But the pinky nail, being 1 centimeter, has 10 little tiny measurements inside of it. Little tiny measurements called millimeters. And I'm going to show you a video right here that's going to explain the difference between inches and centimeters and millimeters. Well, welcome back. I'm glad you made it. Did you enjoy that short little video on the metric system? Did you see how tiny millimeters really are? They're little itty bitty, tiny, tiny little bitty precious little millimeters. Anyway, we're going to talk about something else today. I had a student that wanted to know about telescopes. And right now is absolutely the best time ever to get into some astronomy. What's astronomy? It's when you go out and look at the stars and the moon and planets. Do you need anything fancy to go outside and look at the stars at night? No. You just need eyeballs. So you go out and you look up and you could see all kinds of things. You could see planets. You could see stars. You could see the moon. You can see constellations. If you had a way to magnify everything you were looking at, you could see more. You could see details of a planet. You could see the moons orbiting other planets. You could see nebula. So what do you need to see all those fine details that you can't see with your eyeballs? Well, you don't need anything real fancy. I mean, bird watching binoculars actually will do the trick. Now, what kind of view could you have of a planet with these little binoculars? Well, not much. They're not really good for looking at planets, but these are really good for looking at the craters on the moon. If mom or dad or an uncle or a grandparent or someone you know has a bigger pair of binoculars, then you can use those to actually look at planets. You don't even really need a telescope. The bigger binoculars that a lot of people have they take to sporting events or they'll go bird watching, those will actually allow you to see planets like Mars and Jupiter and Saturn. Now, you will need help trying to locate them in the sky because using your eyeballs, they just look like stars, don't they? So you'll have to probably get on a website and find out exactly where they're at. But we're going to talk about telescopes now. So, a telescope has some basic parts, and here they are. The telescope that was in the illustration is actually called a refracting telescope. There's two main types of telescopes. There's refracting and reflecting. So let's talk about refracting first. A refracting telescope is actually good for beginners. A refracting telescope pretty much has an opening, it has an objective lens, the light shines in through it, it goes all the way down and collects where the eyepiece is. Now, where the eyepiece is of course where you look through and you see a little tiny dot, and then you adjust and you fix it, and then there's a big huge planet now. So those are actually the most basic type of telescopes. Now, there are all kinds you can buy. There's cheaper ones you can get, and there's more expensive ones you can get. Now, I bet most of you just want something basic and simple. So how do you pick out something basic and simple? Well, you have to know something about the metric system. See how this is all tying together? Perfect. So here's what you have to know about the metric system. You have to know about those little tiny itty bitty millimeters that we talked about earlier. Remember the little tiny millimeters? 10 of them fit inside of a centimeter. Those little tiny millimeters is what you need to know. Most basic telescopes are between 40 millimeters on up to 70 or 80 millimeters. Now, how big is that really? Well, about like that. So that's your objective lens. That is where the light shines through. So the bigger your objective lens, the more light it captures. The more light it captures, the more detail you can see, because it's all about how much light can you capture. So what is about a good millimeter for a refracting telescope? Well, for a refracting telescope, you probably want somewhere around 60 to 70 millimeters. If you can find one at 50 millimeters, you'll see a lot of good detail also. So a refracting telescope of around 60, 50, 70 millimeters is actually going to allow you to see a lot of good detail. But I got to tell you to be a little cautious. If you buy a 40 or 50 or 60 millimeter telescope, it's going to make you want a bigger one later. So most astronomers, we're talking beginning astronomers, novice astronomers, most of them will start out with a very small aperture and a very small objective lens. They will start out with 40, 50, or 60 millimeters. They'll start looking at all these planets and moons and nebula, and they'll realize, oh my gosh, if I get a bigger objective lens, if my aperture becomes bigger, I can capture more light. If I can capture more light, I can see more stuff and more detail. So then they have to get monies. They have to get high-paying jobs, and then they can afford to buy bigger telescopes and feed their hobbies. And those can actually get quite expensive, because when you start jumping up to larger objective lenses, when you start getting into 80, 90, 100 millimeters, the price of the telescope goes up considerably. So what you probably want to do if you're going to start out is just shoot for around 40 or 50 millimeters. Now, I did a little researching today, and I looked on eBay, and I looked on Amazon. I actually found some good deals on 40s, 50s, and 60 millimeter telescopes, and I found a really good deal on one that was about $20 today. So you don't have to absolutely break your piggy bank if you want a telescope. You can buy a telescope for around $20 to $30. You can get a really good one for $20 to $30, and it's going to do you the summer just fine. If you take care of it, it'll do you for years just fine. So after you decide, I really like this, then later on in a few years, maybe you can upgrade to a larger size objective lens. So I want to make sure you understand, a refractor telescope has the lens on the end and the light goes straight through to the eyepiece. A reflector telescope has a mirror that the light reflects off of and then into the eyepiece. So they're two different designs. They both let light in, and the bigger the objective lens, the more detail you can see. But then money's an issue. So for me, Mr. Underwood, I would want to do it just as a hobby every once in a while. I maybe would want one that I could hook my smartphone up to and take a few photos every once in a while. I probably wouldn't spend a whole lot. I probably would buy one of the cheaper ones, because it would be just something I did every once in a while. So I hope that helps you out and answers a few questions that you had about telescopes, and I hope it will give you a way to actually search on your own and figure out if this is something you want to do or not. Now, do you have to be a whiz at the metric system? No. You just have to understand how big those little millimeters are, because once you understand how big the little millimeters are, you understand how big 70, 80, 100 millimeters is. Why don't they make it in inches? Well, some telescopes are made in inches, but if I was making telescopes, and that was my business, I would want to make it in a measurement system that the whole world could buy from me. So I probably wouldn't make it in the imperial system. I probably would make it in the metric system. That way, done. Everybody in the whole world can buy my telescope now and not have to do math to calculate the differences. So anyway, I hope that helps you out. I hope you learned something today, and I hope you enjoyed this video. And if you listened very carefully, I don't think you heard my baby in the background today. He was actually asleep, so no whining or fussing in the background. I look forward to seeing everybody tomorrow. I hope that you have a great day.